really, IPT is based on this idea that there are kind of four main problem areas. And you may remember this from, you know, your work with IPTA. Even though that Laura back then had a fifth problem, I think she's dropped that now. Right, yeah, the single parent families, right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But where this evolved from, which is interesting, is that Claremont Wiseman, Eve Chevron, and Bruce Rounsaville basically sat around in a room and they pulled all the charts from the Yale New Haven Psychiatric Hospital, all the people that had been admitted for depression. And they systematically went through all the charts. And they started trying to identify what brought people into the hospital for depression. Why were they coming in? What were the things that were driving the admissions? And when they kind of like, you know, not necessarily factor analyzed, but when they looked at it, the things that emerged, and this is one of the things that's really kind of maintained the integrity of the treatment and really still, in my mind, kind of holds it together, is that there were these four problem areas. So, the four were role transitions, that is, changes that occur as a result of moving from one social role to another. You could also think about it, starting college, you know, leaving home, starting college, leaving college, divorce, moving, retirement, having your children leave, losing a social network is a role transition. So for example, if you have really close friends in high school, really close-knit, you know, and you'll see a lot of kids, I'm sure from Penn State, that come from outlying areas who had come from smaller high schools, had a very entrenched, you know, social network, and all of a sudden they're at the big state school, you know, and that transition sometimes, like, you know, how do I fit in, where do I, you know, who am I? We also see a lot of role transitions with multicultural students. Mm-hmm. You know, we've seen that a lot here with Asian students that make that transition, you know, in terms of like coming to the United States or coming to a university and then all of a sudden having to deal with all those transitions. Again, you know, even with the kids that we have right now currently that we're supervising, a lot of, you know, for lack of a better word, a lot of farm kids who are all of a sudden now coming to the city and feel like that they don't fit in, like I'm different, you know, I'm not like them, you know, and so then that becomes a point of departure for them, you know, kind of interpersonally, and all of a sudden in terms of increased symptomology. Role disputes, a situation in which individual, at least one significant other, have a non-reciprocal expectation. I love that phrase. But really what it is, it's that, for example, it's chronic disagreements or ineffectual relationships with significant others, arguments with spouse, arguments with parents, not just an argument per se, but chronic relational distress. We have one woman currently, one of our therapists on the East Coast is seeing a gal who has a role dispute with her mother. She is an Indian woman whose parents live on the West Coast. She moved to the East Coast. She has pretty significant linear nervosa, but she has an ongoing strained relationship with her mother. That her mother, you know, there's a desire for her daughter to be a traditional Indian woman. There's a desire for her daughter to stay closer to home. And because the mom and dad have a strained relationship, the mother needs the daughter in some respect to kind of like as a shoulder to cry on. And actually one of the things that came up that was very interesting is that when she was a younger girl and living at home, when she and her parents had an argument, the mother would come and get in bed with her to kind of to soothe herself after having this, you know. But then now the mother's really getting after her about leaving home, going away to school, and now she's thinking about going abroad to study, and so that's really ramped up. So there's a real conflict that she's having with her mom, which is not unusual, again, in your setting as well, with parents like, what's your major? What are you doing? When are you gonna, like, you know, what? I mean, how, you know, you're gonna tell her you can get a job with, you know, majoring in art history, you know, like, you know, or this or that, or why aren't you doing this or why aren't you doing that? And so that level of conflict oftentimes will either initiate increased distress psychological distress, either withdrawal, depression, substance use, eating problems, etc. So then disputes, and then grief, which is clearly just loss of a loved one. And historically, in kind of in IPT world, grief has supposedly been more related to, and again, if you think about it from a depression perspective, it's really that unremitting, unresolved grief that people just don't, it's like somebody significant dies and you just don't get over it. But we've also, it's kind of morphed into this idea too about, and we see it a lot too, and you're probably seeing it a lot, even though you may have identified this, is that also too is the unfortunate legacy of trauma or sexual abuse. You don't feel like you are that you aren't that person, or you lost who you were. That event ultimately and inexorably changed who you are, and like so that you're not you feel like you're not the same person. So you could see it as a transition, or you could also see it as grief, like you're having to grieve the fact that you're not an innocent person anymore. You've been this experience is kind of, you feel that you're tainted, and you're stained, and it's not going to go away. And for some, I'm sure you're aware too, for some it's an unfortunate reemergence of perhaps this idea that there's something just innately wrong with them. That bad seed hypothesis, there's something wrong with me, and so people see that and then they take advantage of me, or I've been abused because fundamentally there must be something wrong with me, or this wouldn't have happened, which really becomes more of a deficit issue. But then for some, it's really having to grieve that I'm not that innocent kid anymore. I've had a life-altering experience, and now I'm different, and having to grapple with that transition and having to grapple with that grief. And then finally, our interpersonal deficits. Historically, this was it emerged as kind of a catch-all category, and it almost emerged as a category where Claremont and colleagues thought of this as that almost like that kind of schizoid phenomena. But, obviously you and I know that if somebody is truly schizoid, they wouldn't be coming to psychotherapy anyway. But it's a deficit in interpersonal functioning, and you see these people all the time. They're just odd. They don't connect with other people. They're lonely, they're isolated, they don't know how to have good relationships with others, they're awkward in the way in which they manage their relationships with others. They try too hard, they don't try at all, they are withdrawn, they're challenged socially. Doesn't mean that they're not smart, and doesn't mean that they're not nice people, but they have a social challenge that interferes with their ability to be able to have good, meaningful connections with other people. And we're seeing that a lot in our, school population.
We see a lot of students on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Asperger, well, what would have been considered Asperger.
Right. And again, no fault of their own, but they now are, because of the nature of our educational system, now they find themselves in college, which is great, which is before we wouldn't have seen this group of kids. But now they're there, and they're different. And it puts them in odd, that's a tough word. It puts them in strained social situations. So either where they either get taken advantage of, made fun of, or they just aren't meeting people and feel lonely, and then it's just a bummer, and they feel depressed and left out and disconnected, etc. So those are our problem areas. I'm still, I'm not one to challenge people. I have yet to find another issue that would supplant one of these four. Now, typically, again, in college, what we're seeing transitions. Right now, I think right now, interestingly enough, a lot of deficits, a lot of transitions. Some disputes, like with parents, or with others, like within social settings, like roommates. I worked with a girl not too long ago when I did the pilot who had some role disputes with a roommate and with a mother. But a lot of it is transitions, deficits, some grief. That's kind of what's going on, and you kind of, this in many respects kind of gets to the waterfront of the, the challenges you see at the University Counseling Center in terms of like, if you were to think about, okay, what are the problems that are underlying particular symptom profiles? So, and this is how we think about with IPT. And so one of the things that you'll be doing is as we do kind of our initial phase, or what we call our interpersonal inventory, is really trying to understand what was involved in the onset and maintenance of the current problem area, assign for yourself and for them, again, this is as a collaborative, like, okay, which one of these is going on? Or it could be a role transition complicated by a deficit. But then really, the identification of a problem area then informs kind of later strategies for intervention. It's a way of thinking about it. So if you have somebody who has grief, again, if somebody's grieving, your intervention strategy is much different than somebody who has, a role dispute, or somebody who has an interpersonal deficit. You just have to think about it differently, or how would you help them? How would you help somebody with grief re-engage interpersonally versus how do you help somebody who fundamentally has little or no social experience to develop important social connections? So with each of these, there are particular strategies that we found to be effective. And so we'll talk about those as well. I realize I'm putting a lot of things out there.